So maybe our leading acts can take a chair.
Okay.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Červenkova, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to all of you. Welcome to what was meant as the grande finale of our 1989 week. In fact, it is almost a working week that we have dedicated to the topic of 1989 under the title The Wind of Change That Transformed Europe. We had an opening with 2 literature readings on Monday and Tuesday evening in cooperation with the Austrian Society for Literature, and a continuation yesterday with a format that we called 1989 in a Day, with reflections and recollections of 8 outstanding events of the year 1989. Some of the people who were present yesterday for the event are also in the room. I think it was a very nice format, something that maybe has not been done otherwise in the same way, and I think it was really something that we all enjoyed a lot. So tonight we are going to have what I call the grande finale with the people on the podium. I will not introduce them because this will be done by Heidemarie Uhl from the Austrian Academy of Sciences, who is moderating this evening. Please just let me take or use this opportunity and this occasion of our meeting this evening to say how very pleased we as the IWM are with the cooperation with the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs that allows us to run a program here at the Institute, a program that includes the bringing of fellows, of Czech fellows, to the Institute for Human Sciences to spend some time here and work on projects of their own, and on the cooperation of several events that we are doing in Vienna and in Prague within this program. And I just would like to express how very happy we are with this program and how very proud we are of this cooperation. Mrs. Ambassador, Your Excellency, this is also a moment for you maybe to say a few words of welcome. We are very honored by your presence, and I'm very happy that you're here tonight for this debate. Please.
Dear Madam Uhl, dear Mr. Přibáň, dear Mr. Šimečka, distinguished guest, it is a great pleasure and honor for me to greet you here at the Institut für Wissenschaften for Menschen. It is in recognition of the Institute's unique role that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic and IWM have signed a grant funding agreement for the years 2018 to 2020. Since 2018, a number of distinguished and of young aspiring scientists have been granted fellowship at the Institute. A number of translation and papers have been published. The scheme has also resulted in many public events organized by the IWM in Prague or in Vienna, including a lecture by the likes of Timothy Snyder, Ivan Krastev, Robert Skidelski or Chantal Mouffe. Allow me to express my thanks to IWM Rector Shalini Randeira and especially to the Ludger Hagedorn, who has been instrumental in giving concrete shape to our cooperation. Tonight we will hear a debate between Jiří Přibáň and Martin Šimečka, 2 well-known public intellectuals both in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. The year 1989 remains a major reference point in the Czech Republic. The events of that annus mirabilis still arouse pride and a certain nostalgia, as a testimony to the power of joint peaceful action and a strong sense of togetherness. A lot has been achieved since, we have managed to restore civic liberties and political pluralism. The call for a return to Europe has been answered through our accession to the EU and to NATO. Our sclerotic economy has been modernized. In current Czech political narratives, 1989 is the usual departure point. How much of the spirit of this year is still relevant today remains an open question worth discussing. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very much looking forward to the debate between Jiří Přibáň and Michal Šimečka, and I wish you an inspiring and pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't need a mic. We have. Thank you. Your Excellency, dear guests, dear colleagues, it's a pleasure for me to be here at this, so to say, very exciting evening, marking the end of not celebrations but reflections on, so to say, the glorious year 1989, and also asking the question, as Her Excellency mentioned, what is left from the spirit of 1989. 30 years after, this spirit of euphoria and enthusiasm seems nearly to have vanished. Only if you look at Berlin, and I was there yesterday, we can see a city which really has a kind of big celebration, a whole week of celebrations with 200 events, and the city of Berlin has invested 10 million euros to, so to say, make a kind of a celebration which is really worth, so to say, this caesura event of the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is, so to say, the icon of 1989. But as newspapers report, even the Berlin locals have mixed feelings about this date or about the huge celebrations. And they report on a kind of mental reservation of locals in former East Berlin. And this, so to say, division between East and West, or isn't it a division anymore? Has the West learned lessons from the East? Will also be a point in our discussion. The starting point is that, and I just make a kind of interpretation of what the Institute for the Wissenschaften von Menschen has written in the abstract. The 30th anniversary is not predominantly characterized by euphoria, enthusiasm, and joy, but rather by reflections and critical reviews. And of course, the IWM is the place to discuss all these kinds of reflections and of, so to say, lessons for today. Public media comments or even publications speak of, and I use these terms as a kind of survey over all the articles which were published in the last days, speak of disappointment, disillusion, failure of the spirit of 1989. Even Clastes, who is a very well-known person, not only here but also in Vienna and beyond, chose the drastic title in his latest book, "The Light Has Gone Out," Das Licht erlosch. And we can discuss if this is too drastic or if it describes the situation. And I have now the pleasure to present you the two discussants, panelists of this evening in alphabetical order. Jiří Přibáň, sorry. We discussed about pronunciation at the beginning, and I knew that this will happen. He's political scientist, director of the Center of Law and Society at the School of Law and Politics at Cardiff University. He graduated from Charles University in Prague in 1989, so to say, the famous year. Was there appointed professor of legal theory, philosophy, and sociology in 2002. He was, amongst many other appointments, visiting professor or scholar at the European University Institute in Florence, at New York University, at the office in Prague, the University of California in Berkeley, the University in San Francisco, and allow me just to make it short. And he has published extensively on social theory and sociology of law, on legal philosophy, on constitutional and European comparative law, and theory of human rights. He is not only editor of a journal of law and society, but also a very well-known political commentator and regular contributor to Czech and international media. I read also the BBC World Service and so on. So we have a view from inside and from outside, I would say, and still inside Europe, but who knows. I only want to mention one of his latest books, which the title, it has a very inspiring title, and maybe also for our discussion, Self-Constitution of European Society, Beyond EU Politics, Law and Governance. And it was published at Routledge in 2016. So I can present to you the second public intellectual on this podium, Martin Šimečka. He is a Slovak author and journalist and published in the Samizdat literature during the communist time. His novel, The Year of a Frog, has been translated to English and French. And in the years after 1908, he has an impressive, so to say, media career in various media formats. He founded the independent publishing house Arca, is it right? Later became editor-in-chief of Domino Forum, a Slovak weekly, and was for 9 years, from 1997 to 2006, he acted as editor-in-chief of SME. Maybe we can translate it.
SME, it's just titled SME.
SME, Slovakia's leading daily newspaper. And from 2006 to 2008, he was editor-in-chief of Respect and later editor and contributor of this publication. And since 2016, he is editor of Denik N. I just looked it up this afternoon. It looks very interesting. A newspaper and internet service. And at least I have to mention, in 2018, he was awarded the Slovak Order of the White Double Cross, the highest state decoration of the Republic of Slovakia. And I want to mention that this is a kind of typical Central European career, from young revolutionary to the highest state honors.
But luckily we have there was a president I could take the medal from him because I respected him in that time very much.
Okay.
Which is not the case of Czech Republic. So
Okay.
I was lucky to be Slovak.
Okay. So we are in the middle of discussion yet, I see, but let's go back to the question we have to discuss this evening. 30 years after Europe's unfinished revolution, question mark, and as we so to say discussed at the beginning, 30 years after 1989, in which direction is the wind of change currently blowing in the post-communist countries? What went wrong? I think you both agree that many things went wrong after 1989. What went wrong since the glorious days of the Velvet Revolution? What is your diagnosis? And I want to start with you, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Institute for inviting me, because I was here in spring and I realized what a unique place it is. It's a dangerous place because you meet so many people, you deal with so many ideas that you might get distracted in your own research, but it's a wonderful, wonderful environment, and I feel very honored that recently I was explained that you shouldn't address any ambassador, Your Excellency, if she or he is your country's ambassador. So I should say I'm very honored that Her Excellency, my ambassador, is here, because I'm a dual national, as you said. I'm inside, outside, soon probably to be outside, inside, but I have Czech and British nationality. And so commenting on the 30 years, I think we should, because I've been living in Britain, we should be more optimistic. And especially in Central Europe, we carefully cultivate pessimism. Yeah? And if you take this glass, not only that, of course, the difference between optimist and pessimist is, for optimists it's half full, for pessimists it's half empty, but we in Central Europe, we are so pessimistic that we often say, and the glass is too small anyway. Yeah? It's half empty and too small. So 30 years on, we, of course, achieved many things, and we failed in many things. In one respect, what the revolutions were like, Jürgen Habermas spoke about die nachholende Revolution, a revolution which is to catch up with the West. You need to build, of course, constitutional rights and freedoms. You need to have political democracy, you need to build market economy, and you need to build civil society. After 30 years, we know that the East tried to catch up with the West, but the West has changed significantly. Because of globalization, today the East became more westernized and the West became more easternized in all respects. Yeah? With the rise of new politics of populism, we in New Europe, or what is still referred to as post-communist Europe, we often tend to think, well, we didn't catch up, but we live in a different environment. And this environment brings challenges to both New Europe, Old Europe, and we have to deal with it. And second scholar who is very inspiring to me is legal philosopher and former constitutional justice of the German Constitutional Court, Hans Beckenferder, and he was a research fellow here, I understand. He said, he made a famous Beckenferder dictum: the liberal secularized state lives on prerequisites that it cannot guarantee, it cannot enforce. We know it. And I think it's a great lesson for us in Central Eastern Europe. It's much better than all those cliches that everybody will be repeating: Timothy Garton Ash, and 10 years in Poland, 10 months in Hungary, 10 weeks in Germany, 10 days in Czechoslovakia. Let's forget about it. Everybody will be quoting Ralph Dahrendorf, that you can change the political system in months, you can change economic system in years, but civil society will take decades. Again, this is true, but it became a cliche. What we learned was in Central Eastern Europe was that we changed the system, institutions became new, fresh, but traditions remained. Communist and pre-communist. And they play, undercurrent traditions play more important role than we were ready to acknowledge in the 1990s. In the 1990s, we believed we do economic and political transformation and civil society will come automatically. We have new constitutions with old people. I would say that today we constituted democracy and we half succeeded, half failed in it, and it's in perils today. However, what we experience is the slow constitution of civil society. And here I want to speak optimistically, because it takes decades, it takes generations. Our biggest disadvantage against the West is that our institutions are too young, too fresh, and too dependent on individuals who represent them. If you remove individual judges, you can dismantle the adjudication in favor of constitutional democracy, like in Poland. If something so drastic happens that you draft a new constitution, you can redesign the system, and eastwards of Vienna, there is the first state in the European Union that cannot be called democracy, because checks and balances don't work there. Yeah? And again, so Hungary is a real problem, and if you kill political institutions, you can kill the constitution of civil society. But civil society will and cannot be stopped that easily. Poland is an evidence to it. Czech Republic, we remain hopeful. We have more robust independent institutions. We don't have the conservative counter-revolution Orban style or even Kaczynski style. We are probably experiencing something which can be called Berlusconi period of Czech anti-politics. And when I was in Italy earlier this year, one colleague told me, sometimes I long for Berlusconi. Yeah? It shows that post-communist Europe isn't in it itself. We have a European problem with democracy. Finally, and I don't want to speak too long, I think if you look at the quality of life, life is better than 30 years ago. I was just reading an essay of a colleague of mine who said, the revolution has winners and losers, and winners are on the list of oligarchs. That's complete misreading of the situation. You can take statistics, the average length of life, you can check the environmental situation, and we are in a better position. I don't want to sound too optimistic, because I know, I'm in Central Europe, but we live better, but we face problems, and we have to deal with issues that we never realized we would be. Social inequality, exclusion, injustice, and the marketization of everything, precarization of professions that used to be secure, and post-industrialization of economy, which created problems in the West in the 70s and 80s. And we are going through that phase, because at the moment, post-communist European economies are basically Detroit of the European Union. We make cars, but to make cars is not very profitable nowadays. Yeah? So how shall we make this jump to the 21st century nanotechnologies and other startups? But I want to finish with one thing, and one particular worry, which is in the constitution of civil society. We are much more fragile than many Western countries. And what we're witnessing right now is this conservative counter-revolution coming with attempts to suffocate liberal in liberal democracy. So, media, police, prosecution, judiciary, and public media, in particular private media, but also public media. So what is at stake is the nature of the political system which will be driven either by nationalist, conservative reload of politics along populist lines known elsewhere in Italy, in France, but also in Northern Europe, and don't get me started on the United Kingdom. And but in Central Eastern Europe, the real risk is that we will end up with oligarchies without liberal ethos. You have oligarchies with liberal ethos. Look at the United States. Even in democracy, it's always the minority that rules. I'm sorry to speak like a constitutional lawyer now, but the rule is always in hands of elected or appointed minorities. If the minorities don't represent and respect social interests of majorities, you will get populists challenging the establishment. What is paradoxical in Central Eastern Europe is that populism is thriving on social welfare redistribution. So it is addressing the social question, which we liberals and 89ers completely forgotten about. In Czechoslovak history, in pre-Czechoslovak history, the question of politics was always the social question. Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, not the most popular politician among Austrians, always connected the Czech question with the social question. After 1989, we've completely forgotten about social question, the question of equality, and now people like Orbán, people like Kaczynski, people like Babiš are using the social question to beat the democratic political question. And this is our greatest risk.
We'll address the second 1989er on the podium. Is it really a term, the 1989ers? Because it recalls a little bit the idea of 1848ers in Central Europe. So I come back to the question, what is, so to say, the legacy of the spirit of 1989 in your opinion? Are we too pessimistic as Central Europeans?
Well, I would agree with Jiří, every word he has said. I could have said this as easily as he did. So I will try to focus on a little bit different things, just because I don't want to repeat what he already has said. And I think, well, both way, we have a lot of reasons to be in panic, but there are also a lot of reasons to be optimistic. So it's both way. But talking about spirit, I remember I was in Vienna. Was the first town where I arrived, crossing the Iron Curtain. I had no passport until my 32 years, so I was never ever in other country, not talking about the West. But I knew Vienna from Vienna TV, because in Bratislava we had Vienna TV, so I even learned German to watch Vienna, and it was fantastic because I just imagine that you live in the country when it's just 60 kilometers to Vienna, and you can watch it in TV, and I even followed Austrian politics, but it was like in Mars. And you never expect it to get on that planet, never. And it happened. So it was for me fascinating to come to Vienna as a first town in December. And there was a conference here exactly about the spirit of 89 already in that time. And there was the question was, from the West, with a question towards the East. What can you give us? What can you teach us? We believe you can teach us something, the spirit we didn't get in democratic capitalism, because we are too consumeristic society. But you coming from East, living in communism, fighting for freedom, we could finally find the third way between capitalism and and socialism. Mainly this demand came from the left, never from right. And I remember there was a conference in Vienna, and I was in panel, on that question I said, sorry, we cannot give you anything. Don't expect any spirit from Eastern countries. We only want to imitate. We didn't say the word imitate. Ivan Krastin and I use it very well. We wouldn't dare to say it was too shameful, too humbling to say imitate, but we really did want to imitate West. We want to become West. We wanted to become West. And that's what we said them. Sorry, we have nothing to give you. We are failed societies. We only have to learn, and what we wanted to learn, to be Westerners. The only thing we could give them was our knowledge of Russia, but West didn't want to hear, so it was in vain. But I remember the atmosphere in the audience. It was such a disappointment. I was already a kind of a bad guy because I didn't bring a good news. The thing is that in Central Europe, if we talk about the failures, and we talk about them all evening, and it's a question whether we should use the word failure or mistake, because failure is something very bad, and there were a lot of mistakes, but they were made with the best intentions, just because we were whatever. The thing that we couldn't fulfill the expectation of the Western left was just because we didn't trust left. It was because of communism the left was just something wrong. And not only the communist left, which we were used to be, there was this Marxist stiff, but it was still left. So we knew we had the experience with that lefting thinking. And the Western left was not to be trusted because Western left actually looked to the Soviet Union much more than to the dissidents in Central Europe. Who cared about dissidents? Mostly right, not the left. What was the appeasement politics in Germany and France? There was a left which wanted to have good relationship with Soviet Union, actually above our heads. So, what was who organized the marches for disarming nuclear rockets in Western American rockets, nuclear heads, without talking about Soviet nuclear heads in Central Europe? And we look at them and just, are you mad? What are you doing? And there was a left. So it was very understandable that the left was not to be trusted in Central Europe. On contrary, the right was to be trusted because the right was talking about freedom. It was the only word from Reagan and Thatcher was freedom, personal freedom. Yes, neoliberal agenda is all about individualistic freedom. But for us, it was a paradise in that time. The freedom was just a magic word. Freedom of business, freedom of people, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, everything was about freedom. So it's understandable. It was a mistake, but it was an understandable mistake. We didn't believe in left, we believed in right. And it was all across, actually, Central Europe, all shocking therapy of transformation of economics, all about the agenda of neoliberal ideas, of course. But you can understand that. It's logic. The problem which, and there were many mistakes made in that, and we are now actually, the legacy of 89 and the transformation after 89 is, of course, in all these countries of Central Europe, the roots of today's populism is basically on that. Of course, if you read Jiří talks about the left behind, the losers of transformations, of course, it was because of the neoliberal transformation. The losers, and there are many, now the conservative populists took them. So all this is understandable. What is shocking is that in Central Europe, still 30 years later, you have no left, still no left. There are some signs of left in Poland now. in Czech Republic, left is actually going down. Social democracy is just going down. It's almost finished. In Slovakia, never was left. I mean, the governing party, Smer, is not left party. It's a social conservative party. Nothing to do with left party or the socialist ideas. And in Hungary, the left failed and Orban is actually, his victory was based on corruption of the left. So still today, there are almost no signs of left policy in Central Europe. That is a tragedy. And and it's difficult to explain it only by the legacy of communism. It's not only that. It's also because of European development. Just because in Europe as well, the left has a problem all years had a problem how to react on right ideology, and still has. You haven't in Central Europe not a single Green Party, and that's a question. How come that this is still 30 years later? We have in this in West already the traditional parties. But still, talking about that, it seems like a tragedy. But I would say I see the first signs of the new roots, especially among young generation. Her Excellency said Michael Šimečka, as you said my name, but it's my son, who is. It's fine because I'm used to that already. My son is now more popular than I am because he's a MEP in the European Parliament for the Slovak party, which is already itself calling center left, with a huge success in European elections. They won the European elections. Now they're a little bit down again, but it's another story. So there are the signs. And what we have to face is that the question for the left and Green parties in the West Europe are actually the same as for the Central Europe. We are in the same problems now, and Jiří is right. West and East is not a big difference now. There are many differences in local countries. I think there is a huge difference, which we can talk about, between Hungary, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. There are huge differences, which many Westerners don't know. And I'm much more optimistic about the Czechs and Slovaks than about Hungarians. They are lost. But even in Poland, it could be a big problem. And there are good reasons for that, why Czechs and Slovaks are different than Poles and Czechs, Poles and Hungarians. So I just want to finish by one optimistic sign from my country. Look, I mean, and not only what is going on, the Central Europe is under the populist siege. I mean, it's just a wave of populism. But all capitals are now in hands of liberals. Budapest, newly. Prague, Warsaw, and Bratislava have their capitals are in the hands of modern liberal politicians. It's a good sign. Many towns in Slovakia, in Poland, and in Czech Republic are in hands of liberal politicians and not conservative populists. In Slovakia, we have a new president, very unexpected winner of the president election, which is liberal. I mean, she's called by a Guardian the spiritual liberal, which I think is very correct name or title. And all this is because of the shock, which is especially in Slovakia. It's a shock of the murder of the Slovak journalist almost 2 years ago, and his girlfriend. The shock of how deep the corruption is and how the mafiaization of the state is, and the shock results could be in the two ways, either liberal one or fascist one. In Slovakia now, this is a battle about that. We have a parliament elections in February, and the battle between these two ways of the results of the shock of society of corruption. So we could be optimistic, but also there are, of course, big threats. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I have two questions, a small one and a big one, but I'm not sure which one is which one. So the first one is, and you brought up this topic, and it's of course very, very interesting to observe the developments in the countries you mentioned, in Poland, in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia. But why is there such a difference between Poland and Hungary and the Czech Republic and Slovakia? Maybe you just said two sentences. You wanted to go into detail, but you didn't.
Yeah, there are various differences, but I would say one is crucial. If Jiří talked about the legacy of the past, not communist past, but even the pre-communist past, it's very important. Czechs and Slovaks is a legacy of First Republic under Masaryk. It's a democratic country. Mm-hmm. And if you ask Czechs and Slovaks, even Slovaks, what is their history? I mean, the main, the era, that would be First Republic, the democratic state. You cannot say it in Poland or Hungary, because their past is imperialistic. I mean, they were empires, and mostly based on aristocracy, which is not the case of Slovaks and Czechs, who are just plebiscite nations, luckily. Mm-hmm. Now, the legacy of, if you look at Orban's and Kaczynski ideology, that is ideology of they are missionaries. There are missions. Orban says, I will save Europe from immigrants, Christian Europe. Kaczynski also is talking about new Poland, looking to the past, of course. So these countries look to the past, but the past which is not democratic, which is past of the empires, based on ideology of nationalism. You cannot actually, well, there are nationalists in Slovakia and Czech Republic, definitely they are, but it's a different kind of nationalism. In Czech Republic, Czechs have the prime minister who is by origin the Slovak, an oligarch, and he had a couple of months ago he said he tried to put some idea to the Czech society, saying the Czechs are genetically determined to be better or whatever, achieve better. And it was a huge laugh in Czech society. What? We are genetically... what is it that's... Not only that you as a Slovak shouldn't say it because you are genetically Slovak, but even that idea that we Czechs are determined, committed to something being better. What is stupidity? Yeah. Yeah. And you wouldn't talk about the nationalist ideology in this kind of as a mission. It's absolutely impossible in Czechs and Slovaks country. And there's a huge difference, which means that the populism is, I would say, less dangerous. And the chances of the Czechs and Slovaks are better because of lack of the big history and the plebiscite legacy, which I think many people don't know about that, but I think it's very important.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, it's first quick response to you that I think there could be also a simple political explanation. Orban got a constitutional majority and used the constitutional majority to completely throw out the 20 years of post-communist constitutionalism and establish basically a new state. In Poland, Kaczynski party, PiS, got majority, and it can run a one-party government. Never in post-communist history had Czech Republic a single-party government. It was always in coalitions, and it's interesting how in
Slovakia had.
Yeah, Slovakia had. Yeah, but in Czech Republic, every party, including Babiš was completely indifferent to the problem of immigration and refugees. He only started playing to this tune because he believed he could expand his support and form a government which would be just an ANO government, and he failed in it. Which brings me. So we were lucky. We were lucky in electoral terms. But what Martin was speaking about, we somehow tend to ignore the importance of symbols in politics. And First Republic, of course, is a symbol. It's an ideal, but it's also a point of reference, and it has a moderating effect. And when I was listening to you, Martin, I realized that I'm sitting on a panel with a member of the Kennedys of Slovakia, that you are now a dynasty, because I would like to pay a tribute to your father, Milan Šimečka, who wrote a terrific book about the normalization in Czechoslovakia, the restoration of order. And I think this is exactly a book which we all could learn from, in the East and in the West, because he beautifully describes how normalization in the 70s was not a return to a tyrannical order, but it was a restoration of an authoritarian regime in which your position and your place in society is clearly defined. Politics is our, the public is our. You can live your private lives. Yeah? And today, I think we risk the same restoration of order that populists in Central Eastern Europe want to restore order by saying politics is us, we are messiahs, and yours will be those little niceties in the private personal sphere. Yeah? And I think you're absolutely right that especially Czech, I cannot speak for Slovak society, but certainly in Czech society, if you know the Monty Python film, The Life of Brian, where Brian's mother is addressed and she goes out and says, he's not Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. And then she goes into swear word. And I think we in Czechia somehow tend to favor naughty boys. Yeah? And I'm afraid that the moment came when Czech populists thrive on political incorrectness. Yeah? You can say anything, and the more outrageous you are, the better. Yeah? And, but at the same time, they don't have the pulling power of Polish or Hungarian politicians. My worry, my concern would be, because we tend to forget one thing. Both Kaczynski and Orbán lost election. They lost power, and they reloaded and returned as conservative nationalists. My question is, what's going to happen when Babiš loses election? Is he going to reload?
He will go in prison.
Okay.
One second question, which came out from your statement. We have a very, very strong green movement, especially in the last 2 years, I would say, since climate change has become one of the main topics in politics, in the public sphere. And you mentioned that there is no strong green movement in Czechoslovakia, in Czech Republic and Slovakia. And in general, isn't there this kind of resonance to the, so to say, global topic of climate change in these countries, or how it is dealt in politics and in the public?
I would say that this is one thing which is there are various differences still between West and East, especially in countries, conservative countries, their attitude to homosexuals and minorities and whatever. That's a big difference. The other is this one, the climate issue. It's not that people are not aware of that, but you almost don't hear in politics. You almost don't hear any statement about it, except these new parties who are where my son is. So it's their big issue, and it's not by chance that in European elections 2 ecological, activists became MEPs because they jumped over the other because people just made the preference votes for them. So there is a knowledge of that. There is, especially among young generation, a fear. Definitely, yes. But basically in politics, you almost don't hear about it. If there is, of course, there is something about nature. I mean, and that's a problem I see. In Czech Republic, you have, I mean, Czech are so proud of their nature, which is actually not nature, it's just it's a garden. They have it in their Eden. But this garden is totally destroyed by Babiš. I mean, the huge fields are in destroyed country. And still Czechs don't understand that. I mean, that's, for me, absolutely shocking. In Slovakia, you have oligarchs who cut the forests, I mean, drastically. So if there is an issue, so that our nature is destroyed, our forests, not the planet, I think it has to take time. I mean, it's just, young generation is already aware of that, definitely. But politicians don't catch up with them because they will not win elections with that.
You can win elections in Austria, for example.
Yeah, but not there.
Cannot. It's interesting because this green policy. Let's not overblow the whole situation because yes, the climate change it's a big issue, but at the moment it's part of this apocalyptic politics. Yeah. And we heard, that if you're skeptical about missionaries and messiahs, then you will be skeptical about apocalyptic political pictures and imaginaries. Plus, Central Eastern Europe has different priorities, like the fight against corruption, which is part of the post-communism legacy. We're discussing 30 years on, and I was just thinking about it. In 1989, I was in primary school when 30th anniversary of the end of Second World War was celebrated. And to me, it was like Paleolithic history, yeah? So to the current generations, it's a Paleolithic history, yeah? And 1989. They are much more mobilized by the fact that in the privatization, inequalities emerged, corruption followed, and the whole place is in not just political mess, but social mess. Yeah? If you have personal bankruptcies in hundreds of thousands, like in Czech Republic, then it's a big social problem. Yeah? If you have, green issues are issues, but I think inequality is becoming much bigger issue because post-communist societies are not used to huge inequalities. To me, living in Britain, I'm shocked by levels of inequality. You Austrians don't know about it. Yeah? But in Czechia has one of the lowest relative poverty levels in the European Union. But inequality grows. So of course it's felt, and especially by the young generation that would be telling us, yeah, you stole everything and we have to pay for it. Yeah? So the green issues are, maybe we still are part of early post-industrial economy. Western Europe, United States is part of the late post-industrial society. But the fact is, green issues have to be addressed globally because if the whole of China and India, they want to live lifestyle of Americans with all that waste that American and Western Europeans produce for the planet, then of course we are doomed. And
there is another reason. I mean, psychologically, I mean, the nature itself, despite what I have said, I mean, in communism, you really almost couldn't breathe. It was devastated. The countries were devastated by communist industry. That, 30 years later, is, I mean, much, much better from ecological point of view. So the ecological issue is not that hot. That's one thing. The other, actually, in all Central Europe, is ruled by populists today. All the governments are populist. And what to do? Populists what do? I mean, Jiří is exactly right. I mean, they don't look to the future. They don't, I mean, they look to the past. If you look to the future, you have to talk about climate crisis, but they don't want to because why Trump is denier of climate change? Because he says he was talking about past, make America great again, which is coming to the past. So that's typical for populists. They are talking about the past. They don't look to the future because people are scared of future. And they don't want to listen. They want to hear bad news. And in that, in Central Europe, there people are not used, and that's a third reason, are not used to think globally. They are just small nations. What can we do? We are just a small nations in somewhere used to that the bigger guys decided about the fate of the world. So what? Why we should? I mean, actually, Slovakia was, in the climate issues is probably the most progressive, even with this government, about the coal industry and so on. I mean, they signed even, unlike Czechs, Poles, and Hungarians. So Slovaks are a little bit more, because they want to be better pupils than the others. It's not about the real, understanding that.
The last round, before we go into the audience, you just started with my big question, and that is the question of the issue of class and of social inequality. And I'm asking you really as an expert in political theory. That is something which is it's not understandable for me as somebody who's not in your field of expertise, why the issue of class, let's put Britain away, has so dramatically vanished from the political agenda. Because the decline of social democratic parties has also to do with, so to say, that the question of class and of inequality is not addressable, obviously, anymore in the way it was before. Just thinking about the 70s in Western Europe, there are all these kind of reform agendas and, so to say, thinking of Habermas, for example, with this idea. You said a very important sentence. Today people are scared of the future. If you look back in the 70s, people thought of a bright future with more equality, more chances for everybody, more democratization in all fields of society. What did we lose and why did we lose it?
That's an interesting, fascinating question, because as we know, Habermas and the whole tradition of critical theory was studying legitimation crisis of late capitalism. And what actually happened was the collapse of late socialism. Yeah? The left couldn't predict 1989. This was the problem of the critical theory. But when it comes to class, post-communist societies are very simple. There are no classes. Even our billionaires are from blocks of flats where we lived. Yeah, it's still very fresh. Yeah, those billionaires, we know them. Yeah, and they behave like people from blocks of flats. Yeah, so the question of class was very different in socialist, in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And we still, even at social science levels, we cannot cope with it. Czech sociologists just published a beautifully crafted study of inequality called, 30th anniversary, beautifully crafted. It's called Divided by Freedom. But when you look at methodology, the methodology is fully adopted from a British sociological survey of British society, which was published some years ago. So even social scientists don't know how to use the concept of class. And of course, today, because this was the basic mistake of Karl Marx, he thought that class is an economic category, and he was living in Britain, and he could see that class actually in Britain was always a cultural category. Yeah? And today, class has become a cultural category, even in all around Europe. So you have very successful, I think what Martin mentioned, successful liberal urban classes All those, what Putin would call latte drinking gay Europa, hipsters everywhere, and it's bicycle driven veganism and I don't know what, and Prague is like Bratislava, like Warsaw, but you drive 20 kilometers outside and you're not in a different class, you're in a different world. This country is the same. You are in Vienna, and you drive 50 kilometers outside Vienna and you're in a very different country, in a very different society. So this class, this return of class as a cultural category is something which actually unites both West and East. And but then of course political preferences are different, and the green politics is one example. But this feeling like things are not going right, it's interesting how the West caught up with this. Yeah, things are not going right anywhere nowadays. The question is, what are we going to do? What are we ready to do, and what can we do about reform which would address the questions of social inequality, but social inequality which is nowadays identified through cultural lenses?
Okay, so I think we have now so many issues to discuss, but I really, if you want to respond,
I would prefer the
I
public.
really want to go into the public, please.
Welcome in another liberal city.
Let me be advocatus diaboli for 2 minutes and say something in favor of my dictator. True, he wants to make Poland great again. But I suspect that at the end of the day, he simply wants to...
Shouldn't be the devil's advocate.
He suspects the complete breakdown of the international order. And he doesn't want to leave Poland unprepared. So this might be his nightmare, the repetition of the 1939. And one more comment. You know, there were two types of tyranny in classic Greece, ancient Greece. One was something which happened on the way to democratization, and the other one, the new one, resulted from the strife of the factions. Perhaps this is the wisdom of history, that such dictators could be the figures who work on the socially or the more equal our societies. But it can be or it can be not. I'm not sure.
So maybe, I don't know how the customs are, but maybe collect free positions? Okay. I would say let's collect free discussant voices.
In a way, I will continue on what Andrei said about being prepared. One aspect was missing to me in your discussion. When we are talking about 1989, it was a flight not only from the communist dictatorship, but it was also a flight from the Soviet Empire, from the geopolitics which prescribed to nations how where they belong. Yeah, and now it seems like to Czechs and Slovaks it's no longer an issue. They are happily living in a Europe of their dreams, maybe occasionally disturbed by the nightmare of migrants, but mostly they think about their bad politicians, corruption, social inequality, differences within society, and so on. And it seems like these two nations, yours, are rather indifferent or ambivalent about Russian neo-imperialist attempts and attacks on the Western neoliberal project, on the project of Western integration. And so I wonder, why is it? Is it about your short memory when 30 years is a Paleolithic past? Is it about your plebeian nationhood? Is it about your love for naughty boys? What it is? Thank you.
Another one, please, and when, please. We want to give some answers.
There is no third question, is it?
Okay.
Good evening. I have a very simple question, but I would like to hear your opinion. I'm originally Czech, but also dual citizen French. And I spent so much time in Slovakia, so I can say I know both countries. And I would like you to explain me, please, how come that the Slovaks have elected such a bright, good-looking president? And why do the Czechs re-elect somebody who likes to divide society, who really likes to be politically incorrect? Thank you.
Okay, 3 questions. Let's start with you.
I tried to there was a comment about the Kaczynski and about Poland, about the Kaczynski thinks about the future as at 39 can repeat. Well, I'm not sure, I mean, you probably know better, but as far as I know, Kaczynski is not at all interested in foreign policy. He just doesn't care. His mission is to create a new Poland, or old new Poland. Of course, the people around him have these stupid ideas about the big kind of Central European coming to even to South Europe, kind of a corridor of the states, like from 30s, the idea. But I mean, nobody would take it seriously. I mean, Poles, Kaczynski is in this pretty mad if he thinks that Slovaks or whoever will take Poles as the leaders of the region. They wouldn't say no. However, I mean, there is another question about this. Well, I think the Czechs have the reason not to be afraid of Russia. Just look at the map. Czechs are the only country in Central Europe which is surrounded by members of the European Union. They don't care. They think they can survive easily, whatever. That's why one of the reasons of the Czech antagony to the European Union. We don't need you. We are inside. And this is a Czech, very fascinating attitude, which should be. We could talk hours about it. And Slovaks, on the other hand, of course, they are the neighbors with Ukraine, and they have the history. But on the other hand, Slovaks they are actually, by the all opinion polls, there are a third of those of Slovaks say, well, actually Russia is not bad guy. The memory is short, and that's a memory, and that's a nostalgia of the communism actually. For them, and Slovaks, unlike Czechs, I mean, they still have this nostalgia because, and that was right, in communism, the Slovaks there was era for them, the best, except democracy, best in their history. I mean, there was a modernization of the country. There are many families, I mean, most of the Slovaks were much better off in communism than before. I mean, so what? I mean, you cannot blame them for that very much. And the third question, well, look, I mean, why was Čaputová elected in Slovakia is a big lesson for all Europe, by the way. It's this now a fantastic book of Cass Sunstein, How Changes Happen, because he writes about that in society is sometimes prepared for the ideas it doesn't know even. You have to ask the right question, or you have to have somebody, authority, who says something completely new, unexpected, and people say, oh, why not? In Slovakia, nobody would believe, no politicians would dare to say that what's wrong if two gay people can be married and have adopted children, if they love the children of them, and if they're loving home, and if these children should be in some state institution, it's better if they are in a loving family, whatever, with two men. It's such a radical opinion with the present candidate. What happened was many people said, oh, actually, why not? And this woman has the courage to say that. I will vote for her, even if I disagree with her. Beside all the other effects, that Slovakia had 10 years of the actually populist government. They were tired of all these men and populists, whatever. And the other thing, she is such a personality that the answer is, if you have an offer, if you have a candidate who is authentic, trustful, well, and whatever, and authority, natural authority, then you can win, even against bad guys. And in Czech Republic, the sorry thing was that the other candidate was not that kind.
Yeah, yeah. If I may, Czech society is very socially conservative. Don't forget that revolution, so-called the Velvet Revolution, started only after Todor Živkov was removed from his office. Okay, which tells you something. And and that's why we still live with the man of 1989. First Havel, then Klaus, and now Zeman, who is still perceived as this figure. And he's playing very successfully a big, I wouldn't say friendly giant, who knows, BFG, but he plays, well, I know what ordinary folk feels like, yeah? And that's why I was, before the election, I was saying we need a woman candidate. But I worry that we wouldn't elect her because unlike in Slovakia, and Slovakia had much more turbulent, we mustn't forget that Slovakia had much more turbulent post-communist politics than Czechia. Everything was almost apolitical in Czech. Hardly anything happens. If you look back, yeah, then 30 years in Czech Republic looks pretty dull when measured against Slovakia and Mečiar, Hungary and Orbán, Poland and number of Kaczynskis, so in Czechia, almost nothing happened, and people would be mocking a female candidate, being, oh, what is she doing? What is she after? She's not experienced, and Zeman knows what he's doing. And you're absolutely right. The counter candidate was very weak, I must say. Yeah, that it was just he wasn't Zeman, and it's not enough. It's not a program. Yeah. About the other two questions, I think it's important about. I will speculate briefly about your devil's advocate question, because all the leaders, we somehow in post-communism and in this belief post-89. Everything is rosy. It will be market economy, liberal democracy, and cultural tolerance and openness. And then we had economic crisis. Liberals started celebrating diversity rather than tolerating diversity. So it's a big difference if you tolerate diversity and if you are pushed and forced to celebrate it. Yeah? So all of a sudden, liberalism in conservative segments of society in the countryside and elsewhere started to be felt like a culture danger. Yeah? And the liberals lost something. Yeah? That's behind the rise of extreme right-wing parties, right-wing populism. You cannot explain simply like a post-Brexit situation. You are stupid, bigotic idiots who voted for Brexit. We realized that the liberal left had the same snobbery and xenophobia of the other half of society that they criticize so much. And populists tell you, no, you're absolutely fine. Yeah? So it has this not unsettling, but settling effect on politics, and we forgot about the role of charisma in politics. With the collapse of liberal, I mean economic and political order, yeah, the rise of populism is a logical consequence with one big sociological lesson, that now we know that politics is as much a matter of reasoning as charismatic seduction. Even highly complex post-industrial, postmodern societies and culture are suspect to the power of charisma. And on geopolitics, Yes, I'm afraid, yeah, that Central Europe, and again, this is this slow time, longue durée, that in Czech society, as my friend, my Polish friend says, well, you were always in favor of Russians because you never had a border with them, yeah? But it's also like Czech modern politics was formed in opposition from it was the opposition of periphery to the center. Vienna, then briefly Moscow, we can do socialism with human face, and now it's logically Brussels. Whatever they do there, we know better, but nobody will listen to us.
Yeah, it's a little bit the same in Austria.
Yes.
Former Vienna is now Brussels. I think we can have one or two questions, and when we finish, please.
Thank you so much. It was really fascinating having your Czech and Slovak views on these issues. I would ask one single question because you didn't really mention or reflected on it, the differences between, or potential differences between the discursive, populistic level and the realpolitik, what these people are actually doing. Because in my own reading, in this sense, there is a strong difference between Poland and Hungary. So one of the key issues of urbanism is basically a functional schizophrenia. On the discursive level, he wants to be the best Christian in the old sense, protect this whole antemurale idea of protecting. But if it's about realpolitik, he's making business with Putin. A second nuclear plant is going to be built by Russians. Chinese money is flowing in. There is this opening to the East policy, and so on and so on. So there is very interesting, if you like, contradiction between the discursive level with which you win elections and what you are actually doing. Do you see such contradictions in Czech or Slovak discourses?
Well, of course, although I have to say to much less extent. I mean, it's just because I mean Orban is an ideologue. Whether he means it or not, I mean, you are right. He's pragmatician. So he has a big speeches, but then he has. Well, by the way, he's very careful to have good relationship with Germans. So it's just he plays his economical advantages. Unlike Kaczynski, I think Orban himself sees Kaczynski as a madman because Kaczynski really believes in the ideas. Orban doesn't. But in Slovakia, that's what I was talking about. In Slovakia, you almost have no ideology, and in Czech Republic as well. There are no ideological parties except fascists. They have the only ideological parties are fascists. So you even cannot very much read the political statements. There is no mission, no idea. It's all about, sometimes money, sometimes, there was anti-immigration policy was there, kind of a, we don't want foreigners. We will protect our Christianity, whatever. But it's not ideology, it's stupidity. And actually now it's forgotten almost. So it's difficult to talk about the diversion between, or distraction between these two, between the pragmatic politics, because even, in Slovakia, I would say yes, even that, you could see it in Czech Republic in attitude to European Union, because you are against European Union, but you take money. And I mean, that's the kind of this. But in Slovakia, even that is not. I mean, even this government, however populistic it is quite pro-European. And you haven't, in Slovakia, except fascists, you haven't a really strong anti-European party. So it's difficult to see any disproportion between, because if there are no ideas, you can have a disproportion between ideas and practice.
And if I may add to this, it's interesting how, once again, this Hungary and of course, you have to go back to history and you have to investigate political cultures and traditions. So obviously, Hungary had traditionally good relationships with Germany. unlike Poland. Okay? And frankly, conservative German and Austrian politicians are partly responsible for what happened in Hungary. In 2011, if, and I'm sorry to say that, but if People's Party politicians here that were always behind Orban, if CSU, Bavarian Christians, were criticizing Orban's proposal of the constitution, we could be in a different situation. So it's the West and East implicated in the same trouble. And yeah, obviously every Pole will be, if you are a populist and missionary, you cannot be pro-German. Yeah? It would be mad, yeah, through historical experience. And in Czechia and Slovakia, again, yeah, this is, of course, there is a difference between what populists say and what they do. Babiš government, and I think it's fascinating to see how political parties were playing a card against Babiš without realizing that Babiš is doing social welfare policy which will be popular among people, especially among older generation, among population for which benefits, if they arise, it makes difference. Yeah? If you live in Prague, of course you don't rely on a social welfare state. But if you live in northern Bohemia, you do. Yeah? And so what's happening in Czech politics is that these are affluent years. Yeah? These are very affluent years. And you can throw money. It's a helicopter money. Yeah. What's going to come up when the crisis hits, and it already is biting, yeah, German economy and Czech economy is so dependent. I'm curious what's going to happen next, because we don't have a fascist party. Fascism was never popular in Czech historical tradition, but we had the tradition of the Second Republic, which was almost built for a few months, but it took a pattern from Italian fascism, one government party, one official opposition party, and it was Czechs who already started implementing anti-Jewish legislation, expelling Jews, and this tradition, I really worry that many people would find, and even politicians in Czechia, without fascism as ideology, they would be willing to do something which would be an authoritarian style politics in the legacy of the Second Republic without openly admitting it, because there are only, and we have politicians now talking about traditional family, like Václav Klaus Jr., and Czechs immediately responded to this, of course, yeah. Václav Klaus Jr. is best positioned to speak about traditional family because he has 3. Yeah, he's twice divorced, yeah. And so immediately, yeah, it doesn't fly. His movement is called Tricolora, yeah. And it's so close to the fascist party Czechoslovakia called Vlajka, the flag, that people are mocking it already. And he's got 3%. I think he can make it to the parliament. I would be very skeptical. I wouldn't bet on him becoming prime minister.
So we have a last question, sorry.
You have the last word. I just wanted to have the last word.
Okay, no, I'm not. I have the last question, but it's the last question in the audience.
Sorry? Yeah,
okay, please.
My name is Muriel Blev. I work at the Institute for the Study of Totalitarian Regimes in Prague. And my question is for both of you. Well, who would you say has been the most successful in dealing with the communist past, the Czech Republic or Slovakia?
Okay, wow, a very difficult question. Let's start with you again.
Wow, that would be for a whole seminar.
We have to be short.
Well, I think, look, I mean, I think the Slovaks, they had been dealing with communism very pragmatically. They were much less ideological, I mean, communist. So, but they paid a price for that. On one hand, of course, as I said, Slovaks profited from communism in modernization of the country and so on. So there were almost no. In Slovakia, there doesn't exist anti-communism as an ideology or whatever, even a term nobody uses, which in Czechs happens often. And Slovaks had almost no dissidents. I was one of the rare exceptions with my father. But I think the price was huge. The price was the huge total cynicism of the society, which now pay the price. Mečiar was exactly the post-communist leader coming from the cynicism of Slovak communist agreement between society and the party. In Czech Republic, there were much more deeper division between dissidents and communists, and I think the legacy of that and Václav Havel was much stronger and for the better for Czechs. I mean, I know Czechs now look pretty bad. I mean, very cynical and stupid. But I think this will show in the future, and Slovaks had to fight with their own demons, which were hidden in the communist times, in Mečiar's times. They won the lesson finally, but it was tough. And I still think that you still feel in this country, Slovaks very slowly just start to understand, young generation, what was communism about. And I think we see it in the cynicism of the political sphere. So I would say my answer would be, I think Czechs were better in their way of dealing with communism, I would say.
It's interesting. Maybe I can answer by quoting Claudio Magris. When he wrote Danube, and he commented on Slovaks as if they were very content, if not happy, with communism. And of course, you have to understand that communism was beneficial to Slovak society, its industrialization, the life got better, and so the attitude of Slovaks to the communist past would be different from Czech attitude towards the communist past. This is one thing. The role of dissent is another factor. And third, I was very critical of the lustration law and its moral consequences, its moral ambivalence. And it's the very controversial law, but because Czechs had lustration so early on. If you remember, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, right after the collapse of communism, he was in favor of the Spanish way. Let's not deal with the past. Let's bury the past in the past. But it's interesting that even in Spain, the Spanish non-dealing with the past came back 30, 40 years on, 50 years on, and now they had to unbury and bury the dictator again. Because the past, if you don't deal with the past will deal with you. The way Czechs dealt with the past was controversial, problematic, but because we administered, this was an administrative legal measure in the tradition of the Habsburg bureaucratic order. So if you're elected, you can be the worst chap and communist, but you can have the office. Democratic legitimacy beats lustration. And because the lustration was originally intended as a temporary measure, but nothing is more permanent than temporary, and so it was incorporated. It's interesting that dealing with the communist past stopped to be a big public issue. And when I was doing research for the lustration legacy in 2009, it was funny that you try to Google lustrations in Czech, and the most references would be to the car industry, registration of your car, yeah, and so nothing to do with politics, and it only shows that because then dealing with the past is different than dealing with communism and anti-communism, and because anti-communism was used to delegitimize social democracy in particular stage in the first years of 2000s, it became a political tool and it could never play a significant symbolic role, and it petered out. So that's why today we have Prime Minister who is most likely a former secret police agent, who is Slovak by origin, so he's not ethnically Czech. Aren't we Czechs the most tolerant, the most open society? Maybe the most cynical at the same time, yeah.
I would like to add just one thing, because I think this was what titled The Spirit of '89. And talking about Czechs and Slovaks, there is another big difference in Central Europe. If you look at what is going on now in the anniversary of November '89 in Czechs and Slovaks, there are huge kind of a preparing celebration. And I have to say, I mean, I'm surprised how young people, how many people are interested in that. But that's one thing which is very sympathetic. What is crucial is that among Czechs and Slovaks, there is no real antagonism about the legacy of '89. Yeah. Unlike in Hungary and Poland. In Hungary and Poland, there's a political issue. Orbán and Kaczynski say, we are to finish the revolution because there was a betrayer, the left, Michnik and whoever, and communists and liberals in Hungary betrayed the revolution, betrayed '89. We are now the real legacy of '89. This is not an issue in Czechs and Slovaks. And that's very important. Actually, there is a social agreement that '89 was fine, and there is no other one who would stand up and say, I am the legacy. Everybody respects the real legacy of '89, and the people from '89, they are those who are respected, so that's a quite important thing. What I wanted to say here, it's a big difference.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's interesting that what really matters about Babiš for Czech public is it's not that he would be a secret police agent, but he's a crook. And if he tries to play the system and appoint a new Minister of Justice, it invites 500,000 people to the Letná Square because people don't trust him, and I think you're absolutely right. This is a big difference about Hungary and Poland, that they want to finish the revolution, and Czech or Slovak mobilization of the public shows that this revolution can never be finished. It always have to remain unfinished to keep its civic ethos.
Absolutely.
So that's a perfect last sentence of a panel which is called Europe's Unfinished Revolution ? Thank you.
Let's not finish it.
And you have maybe noticed that the debate just started. I mean, this was the most furious moment of the whole debate. But we will end it anyway now. Just let me add maybe that I admit in the program that we had in our week dedicated to 1989, Slovaks and Czechs were a bit underrepresented, but Martin and Jiří, you more than made up for it tonight with what I call the grande finale in the beginning, so thank you very much for that. And also one thing that maybe has also a bit to do with the '89 and after '89 development, we have a Slovak and a Czech here on the podium. This is also something that is closely linked to the post-'89 development, the separation of Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And this, one should mention it, I really think it's a very remarkable development, this peaceful separation, and something that one has to admire and admit that it was, I don't know if one should call it a success, but it's something at least that works. And if I see the atmosphere of the two of you interacting here, I think it's quite representative of how Czechs and Slovaks relate to each other. It's more like pulling one's leg than really fighting, and I think this is enjoyable, and it's just a nice thing, right? So now please all of you feel invited to our cafeteria downstairs for a bite to eat and for a glass of wine or two. Join us there. And one very final remark before we give the big applause to the three of them. One final remark: IWM is organizing book theater debate regularly. This Sunday, 11 a.m. we have another book theater debate. Seeing on the podium Constanze Itzel from the Museum of European History in Brussels, Ruth Wodak, a linguist from Vienna, and two people well known to this house and also very well known to the two on the podium here, Ivan Krastev, permanent fellow to IWM, and Jacques Rupnik, political scientist from Paris. So maybe if you have the time, join us for that as well, Sunday 11. And now the big final applause for the three on the podium: Martin Milan Šimečka, Heidemarie Uhl, and Jiří Přibáň. Thank you.
Thank you.